So welcome to tonight, and let's go to Prague. And let's begin by hearing a little bit about the history of Prague and a bit about the Jewish Museum in Prague. So I'm delighted to welcome our first guest tonight, Zuzana Pavlovska. Zuzana is the head of the Department for Education and Culture of the Jewish Museum in Prague. She also lectures in Jewish Studies and Modern Hebrew at Prague's Charles University, and she represents the Czech Republic on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. So Zuzana, over to you. Please tell us, take us on a whistle-stop tour of Jewish culture in Prague.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, for introducing me, and thank you for inviting me to this special eve about Prague. I will try to be very brief because I got just a few minutes to share the history of the Jewish Museum and the Jewish Prague and the Jewish culture. So I would like to start with the history of the Jews, that it's really a very long history. It started in 1000. And I would like to start with the founding of the Jewish Museum in Prague, which I'm representing, which was founded in 1906. And like you can see, we were the first Jewish museum, oldest in Europe after Vienna and Frankfurt. And the special thing about the Jewish Museum in Prague is that the Jewish Museum and the synagogues we have still today and the famous Jewish cemetery, it's actually in the area of the former Jewish ghetto, which was used from the 13th to the 1800 when Jews were forced to live in the ghetto. And at the end of the 1900, when Jews already left this area, there were a lot of reconstructions in the Jewish quarter, and most of the parts was actually completely destroyed, which you can see here on these pictures. On the right side, for example, you can see one of the synagogues, which was demolished in 1906, which was the Gypsy synagogue, called after Solomon Zigeuner. But still, actually, in this area now, we have 6 synagogues and a cemetery which represent the old history of the Jewish Prague. You already said that actually when the Jewish Museum in Prague started in 1906, the best time was still 1938. Later on, the Nazi era came actually, and we know that almost 80,000 Jews from my country perished in the Shoah. And we can see one of the famous pictures from that time, which is actually when Hitler visited Prague. You can see the picture from Prague Castle. And we know that the Nazi occupation of the Czech lands actually started on the 15th of March, 1939. And this is also one of the next step of the history of the Jewish Museum in Prague and of the Jews in Prague, because we know that before World War II, we had 153 Jewish communities. Now we have 10. And we know that actually the most collections we got during the time of the World War II. You can see that in 1939, there was actually the Central Office for Jewish Immigration. And also we know that at that time, many Jews tried to leave the country, but it was not possible at the time because Palestine was closed and so many countries closed the doors also. At that time, there was the big interest of the Jewish property, and Nazi asked to send all the Jewish property to Prague, and the synagogue started to be used as a places for the Jewish property from all around the Czech lands. It started in 1941 that the synagogues actually were closed and they were converted into warehouses, and you can see some of the stuff inside the synagogues. And on the left side, there's like an amazing picture because we will see the synagogue today. It's one of the famous synagogue in Prague. Next to the synagogue, we have the statue of Franz Kafka. It's the Spanish synagogue, which was built at the end of the 1900s. And you can see that the synagogue was, for example, used as a storage house of the benches. We also know that the main aim was to gather together the collections of the Jewish Museum of Prague and Mikulov, as well as ritual objects from Prague synagogues and the other artifacts, which means that at the time, so many things went to Prague, and because they were not sent to other places, now we have the biggest collections of the Torah scrolls, all the curtains and other stuff in our museum, which is actually very important for us today to share the history, because it's also not just the history of the things and of the heritage of the Jewish culture in my country, but also it's the story of the World War II. We can also see that like we already heard that many people were deported from my country, from the Protectorate Bohemia and Moravia, and from 118,310, 80,000 from them didn't survive. In 1945, 15,000 people came back, most of the survivors, and they thought that maybe the life and the return will be better than before. But of course, there were so many questions because they were returning to the country, which wasn't already the country before. And we know that I think the best is to hear what Franta Kohn actually said, that everything looked the same as before. Prague wasn't bombed, everything was on its place, just people I knew were missing. This is a very famous picture because on the left side, you can see the famous Charles Bridge, one of the oldest bridges in Prague. In 1948, and it's very quick, the history of the Czech Jews and of the heritage was actually something happened in Czech lands, which means that the communists took the power and Jews were again not very welcome in the country. And also it was connected with the creation of the state of Israel. So this is one of the first waves that the survivors decided to leave the country, and most of the time most of them actually left. The next wave was in 1968 when we were occupied by the Soviets. And we are going back to the history of the Jewish Museum, which is important that in 1950, the state took the power on the Jewish Museum, and the collections had become more than 100 times larger as a result, which you can see some of the objects we got during the time of the World War II, which are the shield and the special ring for wedding. And also, actually, the Jewish Museum started to work under the communist regime, but still they were trying to do as much as they could. Some of the synagogues were reconstructed and still they were used as a museum. You can also see the interior of the Pinka synagogue, which is today also one of the famous synagogues because it's a memorial to the victims of the Shoah. And we can see that it was something very special in the 50s that it started. It was a big, actually, thanks to the director of the Jewish Museum at the time, Hanna Volavkova. She asked two artists, Jiří Jon and Václav Boštík, to remember all the people they perished in Shoah, and they started to prepare the memorial. And you can see the wall on the left side with menorah, and on the wall you can see altogether 80,000 names of the Jewish people from my country they perished in Shoah. What is very sad about this memorial, which was during the time of the communist regime, that when they finish and they open it in 1960, very soon the synagogue has to close the door, and the synagogue was closed for many, many years, and we opened it again in 1994, before all the names were actually released and nothing was inside. So they finished, they opened it, and later on, after 1968, when we were occupied by the Russians, we have to close the door and we couldn't talk about it again. And this was the second wave that many Jews actually left the country. Before also, like I said, that the situation for the Jews in Prague wasn't so good because in 1952, we can talk about the anti-Semitic trials and again of the persecution of the Jews in my country. In 1960, there is one of the famous rabbis on the picture. We can see that many of the people actually left the country, and this is actually the first rabbi after the Velvet Revolution, Rabbi Sidon, who is still actually the chief rabbi of the Czech lands. And I will go briefly to the better time, which is, of course, the Velvet Revolution. It's known all around the world. In 1989, you can see the Wenceslav Square and Václav Havel, and actually everything changed also for the Jewish culture, but also for the Jewish Museum in Prague. The Jewish Museum in Prague started to be again the private organization in 1994. The main director from that time, it's Leo Pavlát. You can see him on the picture, and behind him, it's actually again the Spanish synagogue with the famous Moorish design. The synagogues actually and the Prague Jewish cemetery was giving back to the Jewish community, and in some places we have still the services, and some places are still used as a museum, as a part of the Jewish Museum, and the synagogues are used as a exhibition halls or concert halls, but also as a prayer halls. You can also in 1996, something I think very good happened in Czech lands. In 1996, the Department for Education and Culture was founded. And actually I'm running this department from 2011. And we are doing all kind of the lectures and cultural events for public schools and for public in generally. We have also so many travel exhibitions and other stuff. And now a little bit of the virtual tour. You can see actually on the picture the famous Jewish cemetery. Rebecca told in the beginning that Prague is also famous because of the Golem story. And Rabbi Law, actually, who died in 1609, is buried on this cemetery. Next to the cemetery, it's a white building, which is a Klaus synagogue. Today, the Klaus synagogue, it's not used anymore as a synagogue, but inside we have the exhibition about the tradition and customs. And we are, of course, using the artifacts and all the objects we got during the time of the World War II. And the main idea is to get back the story of the objects. So the new exhibitions started to have again the story that you can read a little bit more about the object, but also about the community or about the people they used to have this object, but it will be in the other synagogues. And next to the white building, you can see the neo-Romanesque, kind of like a little building, which is the ceremonial hall. And we have the exhibition about the Hevra Kadisha. This is actually the building of the Hevra Kadisha. And in front of the building, you can see very beautiful tombstone with the lions, and the lions are holding some coat of arms. And it's called a tumba, and it's a very famous lady, Handel Bashevich. She was a wife of the first Jewish man who became a nobleman in the 1700s. Here we have the Meisel synagogue, which was built during the time when Rabbi Law actually lived in Prague. It was built in 1592. The design from outside, it's today neo-Gothic, but it was Renaissance in the beginning. And inside we have the exhibition about the Jewish history from the beginning of till 1800 when Maria Theresa actually died. So it's from the 1300 to the 1780. And this place, it's they use also for all kinds of the cultural events, concerts, lectures, and other things. And the other synagogue from a very nice view, it's the Pinkas synagogue together with the cemetery. And there's also like a new part, which is a Pinkas little lane. And there's a exhibition about the transports and deportations from my country. Like I said, the Pinkas synagogue, it's today used as a memorial of Shoah. And next to the Pinkas synagogue, we have the old and the new mikveh. And next to the Pinkas synagogue, we have the old Jewish cemetery. I just would like to say that there is still 12,000 tombstones above the cemetery, and we know that Jewish people used to bury people here from the 13 to the 1800. So according to what we know, there's a belief there's more than 100,000 people actually buried in many layers. And the last synagogue, actually, which was just reconstructed and opened for one day, is the Spanish synagogue. And you can see the interior, which is beautiful, the Moorish design. And on the left side, there's a winter synagogue, which is today used also as a part of the exhibition, which talks about the time of the 60s and 70s. Yeah, and that's it. So
Thank you.
I was keeping on time.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to the questions.
That's lovely. Thank you, Zuzana, for giving us a glimpse of the work of the museum. Really fascinating to hear, and also showing us beautiful pictures of Prague, which is whetting my appetite, at least, for being able to visit the city very soon, I hope. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go now to another Prague resident, Irena Dousková. Irena wrote about uncovering her Jewish identity during the communist years when she was living in Prague. And she is a Prague-based writer and poet. She's the author of many novels and several collections of poems. Her most famous work is Be Pravdu, which is set in Czechoslovakia during the 1970s. And her most recent novel is Rakviki, which translates as Little Coffins, which was published in 2018. And apologies for my pronunciation of any of those words. She's also joined by her son, Mattia, who is going to be doing some translating for her. Mattia is a psychology student at the Charles University in Prague. So, Irena, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you came to know your Jewish identity and the Jewish culture of Prague, and talk to us a little bit about that.
Okay. Excuse my English. My son will be translating, and já budu mluvit česky, jo? Takže já jsem se narodila ve smíšené rodině, maminka je Češka, otec byl z židovské rodiny a když byl 3 měsíce emigroval.
So I was born into a mixed family. My mother is Czech and my father was Jewish. And when I was 3 months old, he ran from Czechoslovakia and moved to Israel.
Takže jsem ho vůbec nepoznala a prvních 5 let jsem prožila, že moje maminka byla herečka, takže se ocitla v komplikované situaci a prožila jsem první prarodičů, což byli rodiče mé matky.
So I didn't get to meet him, and the first 5 years I lived with my grandparents because my mother was she was a theater actress and she was in a difficult situation. So for the 5 years I lived with my grandparents.
A od dědečka a babičky, kteří byli věřící a patřili k Československé církvi husitské, což je druh, řekněme, zjednodušeně protestantské církve. Oni byli vlastně první, kdo se mi snažili říct něco o tom, z jaké rodiny pocházím.
And though they were Hussites, which is a form of Protestantism, it's a Czech Republic specific religion. They taught me about religion in itself, and they also taught me about the origin of my family.
Čili já jsem o tom věděla od toho nejranějšího dětství, zejména babička se mnou o tom mluvila a vyprávěla mi o mém otci, který teda se jmenoval také Petr Freistadt. Vyprávěla mi o něm a o jeho rodičích a o tom, co teda se stalo, o holokaustu, o tom, co se stalo za války a že všichni byli zavražděni. Jeho rodiče i bratr a širší příbuzní.
So mostly my grandmother would tell me the story about my grandfather, her father. And his family, who came from Slovakia originally, and essentially he was the only one who survived the Shoah. All the other members of the family were murdered at one point or another in concentration camps.
A protože já jsem byla hodně malé dítě v té době, a ta babička to myslela dobře a zpětně jsem jí vděčná, že se mnou o tom mluvila a že vlastně se to v rodině netajilo a dozvěděla jsem se o tom a tak dále, ale v tom věku, kdy ona tohle všechno mi říkala i s tím, že přišel o maminku, otce a všechno je blízké, tak to pro mě bylo zároveň hrozně traumatizující.
Being a child at that age, hearing these stories was not very pleasant, let's say, and it caused a lot of nightmares, let's say.
Takže jsem vlastně ani moc to vyprávění už pak nechtěla poslouchat, protože jsem se toho bála, měla jsem toho špatný sny a tak dále. No. Tak to bylo.
Which resulted in me not wanting to hear a lot about the family because I had a bad feeling essentially about being Jewish at that point.
Že vlastně to, co mi z té nejranější doby, z toho vyprávění o tom, co to židovství obnáší, co mi z toho zůstalo, utkvívalo v tom věku 5-6 let v raném dětství v hlavě, byly vlastně ty hrůzy a strach, že tedy se může stát cokoliv vlastně i se mnou, s mojí rodinou, s mojí mámou a tak dále.
So what I was left with was this uneasy feeling of a threat, let's say, to myself or my family, because considering myself Jewish and hearing about all the stories from the Second World War was not easy to digest.
No nicméně s věkem přišla nějaká další fáze, kdy řekněme od takových 14, možná 13, 14, 15 let a nejvíc potom v čase střední školy už ten můj zájem začal být nějaký jiný a seriózní, řekněme, a snažila jsem se zjistit vlastně a pochopit všechno o tom, co se dalo, o svém původu, o židovství všeobecně.
This all changed around, let's say, 14 to 15 years of age, when this uneasy feeling was followed up by an actual interest in the topic and in the identity, and resulted in a hunger for learning as much as I can about the topic.
No a to, co vlastně měla jsem k dispozici především knihy, takže snažila jsem se co nejvíce o tom přečíst, seznamovala jsem se s židovskou kulturou, respektive s jejími nejslavnějšími reprezentanty, se spisovateli, s umělci. Chtěla jsem se dozvědět i něco o židovství jako o víře a náboženství, ale bylo to komplikované, takhle, bylo komplikované, ne-li nemožné, aspoň pro mě, při tom, z jaké rodiny jsem byla, seznámit se vlastně s reálnými Židy jako s živými lidmi.
So the biggest resource I had was books in general. I mostly went around learning more about Jewish culture and Jewish authors. But because being from the family I am from, there wasn't a lot of Jewish people around to get to know and to ask them questions and learn more from them.
No a někdy v tom věku asi 16 let přibližně jsem učinila nějaký pokus jít v Praze na židovskou obec a stát se její členkou, což nedopadlo dobře a tenkrát někdo, na koho jsem tam narazila, tak mě odmítli a nějak, já jsem o tom se zmiňovala v tom článku, že zavolal ten člověk k nám domů a byl z toho doma malér, ale vlastně nešlo o to, že bych se bála se tam znovu vrátit z nějakých politických důvodů, ale spíš proto, že jsem byla vyplašená, mladá a měla jsem pocit, bylo pro mě hrozně těžký, měla jsem pocit, že se vnucuju někam, kde není zájem.
When I was 16, I made the attempt to go and join the Prague community, the official Jewish community in Prague, which didn't go well. In fact, the person I met there phoned home, let's say, so he told my parents, and there was a problem at home, and it didn't go well, let's say. So I had this feeling that they're not interested and that I shouldn't keep trying.
Ale nechci tím říct, že v těch 70. nebo 80. letech byla židovská obec v Praze úplně uzavřená a nebylo možné tam chodit. Já zpětně jsem se seznámila s lidmi, kteří tam v té době už chodili a nějak se zapojili, ale většinou to byli lidi, kteří teda měli aspoň jednoho židovského rodiče, s kterým v té rodině žili, takže tam vlastně přirozeně začali chodit s ním, což já jsem tuhletu možnost neměla, takže to pro mě bylo složité.
By that, I'm not trying to state that the Prague community was hard to get into or that it wasn't receptive, but meeting a couple people later that joined in these 70s or so, they usually had one or both parents that then naturally introduced them into the community, which I did not have.
A nebo prostě nebyli tak strašně introvertní, jako já jsem byla. A nějakým způsobem se jim to podařilo i bez těch rodičů. No ale nicméně přece jenom se i ten vývoj společenský malinko posouval v 80. letech a trošku vlastně přístupnější nebo otevřenější vůči řekněme veřejnosti se stávala i ta obec, takže se tam začaly konat nějaké akce, přednášky třeba. Mezitím jsem se i přece jenom seznámila s nějakými lidmi, našla jsem si nějaké přátele, kteří měli podobný původ a podobně se o to zajímali, takže jsem postupně začala na tu židovskou obec chodit alespoň na tyhle ty akce.
Nonetheless, later down the line, around in the 80s, there were a few seminars and lectures that I got to attend, and I met a few people from the similar background and with similar interests that helped me join into the Jewish life in Prague.
No a potom v roce 89 přišla sametová revoluce, která všechno zásadně změnila a zásadně změnila i můj život, nejenom v otázce židovství. A časem tedy jsem konečně se dostala i k tomu nějakým způsobem nejenom o něm číst, ale právě ho i žít, řekněme, nějakým způsobem tu víru praktikovat. A protože vlastně pražská židovská obec se vydala po tom roce 89 cestou ortodoxie, ale začaly vznikat i další menší komunity různého směru, takže já jsem potom se stala členkou jedné z těch menších a spíš liberálnějších komunit.
So in the year 89, the Velvet Revolution came about and my life changed drastically, as is probably obvious. For the better. And I was able to not only read about Jewish life, but to actually live it and experience it for myself. Now, because the Prague Jewish community, the official one, took the route of Orthodox Judaism, I joined a different community, which went the reform way. So I am now a member of Beitimcha, which is a liberal reform community.
A moje děti už měly možnost chodit do židovské školy, na Loderovo gymnázium. Já jsem pak pracovala několik let jako redaktorka právě židovského měsíčníku, napřed to byla Atikva, potom se jmenoval Maskil. Židovství se nějakým způsobem poměrně často dotýkám i ve svých knihách. Že jste chodili do těch, už jste měli možnost, takže už máte přátelé.
Thanks to all the changes, both of my children were able to attend and graduate a Jewish high school, the Lauder one in particular.
Takže umějí anglicky.
And they are both bar bat mitzvah. And I also touch on Jewish life a lot in my books and on Judaism. Judaism as a whole is a big part of my work and life. And that's probably everything. And you can ask whatever's on your mind, and we'll try to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Irena, for sharing your very personal experience of growing up and finding out about your background. And it's similar in many ways to lots of other people I spoke to when I was researching this issue, the January issue of the magazine. And I think maybe our audience will have a lot of questions for you and the other people on the panel about that. And also thank you so much, Mattia, for translating and doing a fantastic job with that. Thank you. Can I just ask you, Mattia, what's your Jewish life like now in Prague? Would you like to just say a few words? Are you involved in the Jewish community?
Yes, actually I am. So as I said, I graduated the high school, and already during that time I was attending a Jewish summer camp in Hungary, and some of you might know the name. It's the Sarvash camp, which is sponsored by JDC, and it's a big international thing, and this sort of introduced me into this whole life of Jewish informal education and being a part of that. So I'm now working as a member of the Jewish Federation, or like the Federation of Jewish Communities in Prague, and I mostly work with kids in summer camps, either local in Czech Republic, or I am actually now one of 4 unit heads. So we in the Sarvash summer camp. So we are responsible for the Czechoslovak group there. So that's essentially my Jewish life. I work with young adults and kids in the community.
Lovely to hear. Okay, thank you both very much. Now, our next guest is joining us from Los Angeles. It's the American writer Shalom Auslander. Shalom is the author of the critically acclaimed short story collection Beware of God, the memoir Foreskin's Lament, and the 2012 novel Hope, a Tragedy. His latest novel, Mother for Dinner, has just been published by Picador. And Shalom is joining us today because he wrote a wonderful and very funny essay in this Prague issue of Jewish Renaissance. He talked about Kafka and the relationship between Kafka and the city, his home city, Prague, which was quite a difficult one and a surprising one, perhaps, for those of us who immediately associate Prague with Kafka or Kafka with Prague. So Shalom, shall we go over to you, and you're going to tell us a little bit about Kafka and his relationship with Prague. Oh, we can't hear you.
How's that?
Great.
Better? Trust
Great.
me, I'm much more entertaining when I'm muted. Yeah, it's kind of a weird situation. I remember, Rebecca, when you first reached out to me and you said, hey, we're doing a special issue on Prague, and it's Prague Spring, and it's all this great stuff about Prague. And you said, do you want to write about Kafka? And I was like, well, sure, but I got some bad news. He hated it. He was not a fan of the town. And to your credit, you said, well, that might be interesting, so let's see where it goes. But it is an interesting situation. Kafka wrote a lot about Prague, and most of it was amounted to get me the hell out of here, which he never did. But he didn't. His whole world centered around about 100 yards of the center of Prague. His original home, their family's second home, the apartment he moved into, his school, his office, everything was within, as he described it. He once drew a little circle with his hand on his palm for a friend and said, this is my entire world in this little circle. And he seemed to always want to get out. And I can say that both living in Los Angeles, I can relate to that feeling. But it was always interesting to me, why didn't he leave? Why he, contrary to our, the myth of Kafka as this sort of struggling, sickly weirdo, he was a very successful insurance executive. His family had money, his friends had money, they supported him. He could have left at any time. And why didn't he leave? And so I thought it would be interesting to investigate that a little bit and look into that a little bit. One of the things that struck me as interesting in his writing is that one of the sort of breakthrough things that he wrote was the letter to my father, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a letter to his father, but finally saying all the things he always wanted to say about, you're abusive and you're terrible and all this other stuff. And he only was able to write that when he left Prague. It was one of the few times he left. He went to a friend of a friend, had a little cottage out of the city. And in that remote, sort of isolated place, he was able finally to tap in and to that inner voice, to be as honest as he wanted to be. And that sort of changed everything for him, that trip. It sort of opened him up to being able to write. And so I wondered, was it Prague specifically? Was there something about Prague? Was it, I don't know, it could be anything. And what I remembered was that of all the things I've read about him, I met Kafka a long time ago, and I was 16, and I was a Orthodox yeshiva student, really struggling and not liking where I lived and what the world I was in. And here was this guy who I didn't even know was Jewish at the time, but was writing all this incredibly funny, honest, emotional stuff. I didn't know Kafka as a guy who wrote about bureaucracy or politics. To me, he was a guy who wrote about his heart, about, when he writes about, Gregor Samsa waking up and finding he's a bug, I knew what he was talking about. I felt the same way about myself. And when in the story, he finally, sort of comes out to his family, they just hate him for it, and he finally dies and they're happy. And that's the funny ending. And so I related to him on a very emotional level. And I read everything I could about him. And one of the things that struck out to me about him when I was thinking about this piece and what's his relationship to Prague was an entry that he wrote in his diary, which is just astounding. It's probably one of the most remarkable things he ever wrote. It's one sentence, and very few people know about it. But it was essentially what he wrote the day after World War I began. And he wrote, "Germany has declared war on Russia, swimming in the afternoon." And that was his diary entry. And that always just hit me so hard, because here was this guy who had sort of dedicated himself to investigating the world inside his head, as opposed to the city around him. And with this momentous event going on, he still stayed alone. He stayed by himself. He did his thing. He didn't run out and buy all the newspapers. He didn't blog about it. He didn't go on Twitter and say, "OMG, we're at war, isn't this horrible?" He went about his daily practice. And so the more I thought about it and tried to relate it to my own life, and look, literature and art are Rorschach tests. We don't know what he meant or thought because he's dead. And however we respond to certain art has a lot to do with the way we're feeling, about ourselves. But when I read that he didn't like where he was and that he was most productive when he left, and that his mindset on the eve of World War I was to write in his diary, war is declared, I'm going swimming. It struck me as it wasn't Prague that he disliked or didn't want to be a part of at all. It was the world. For him, being nowhere would be the best possible place. If he could have found a nowhere, I think he would have gone there. But he also knew that there is no nowhere. If he had up and left and went to Paris, then Paris would have been the place that he would have felt ill at ease. And I think that's just the nature of him, and to me, it's the nature of a lot of artists. A lot of the people, the writers that I find most interesting, always seem to have that relationship with the place they come from. One of the most interesting things to me about another writer who meant a lot to me was Samuel Beckett, who hated Ireland, and never, whenever he went back, and he constantly went back. He moved to Paris, went back, came back to Paris, went back. Every time he came back to Ireland, he broke out in an enormous rash, in a full body rash, like a painful rash. And it never even occurred to him, as brilliant as he was, maybe there's something about this place that rubs me the wrong way. And where can I get some Benadryl? So I find that that maybe with Kafka and Prague, the story is less about, boy, I can't stand this place, than I can't stand a place. Late in his life, Kurt Vonnegut wrote that he felt, watching what had happened to America, that he feels like, in his words, a man without a country. But I would say Vonnegut always felt like a man without a country, as did Kafka, as do I. Without a city, without a town, and that what we're doing in writing and exploring ourselves is trying to find a place where we feel comfortable, or at least create a world that operates in the way that we imagine the world operating, that at least either in a funny way, in a dark way like Kafka wrote, in a sort of fatalistic way in the way Beckett wrote, but creating a world that matches our perception of it. Because I think there is something about the type that needs to express themselves that has a lot to do with not feeling particularly comfortable with who they are, or where they are. So, for me, it's really interesting because Irena's story is the complete opposite of mine. Hers was, finding a way into a community. Mine was trying to find a way out. I had a horrible experience with the New York Jewish community and my family. God in particular, I still have huge issues with. He and I are going to have a very difficult time when I die. We're going to be arguing for eternity, and I look forward to that. But it was a question of finding my way out. And I think some writers are looking for the way in and some are looking for the way out. And Kafka was always looking for the way out. And I think that's what I admired about him so much. So I can't really say that, hey guys, hey Prague folks, here's something to feel great about because Kafka was from Prague, because he didn't like it. But at least I can tell you that my feeling is he wouldn't have liked it anywhere. Maybe that's the upside, because that's just the way he was. And it's sad to me that I hope that he knew at some level that he did leave, that he did finally escape, not just by dying and getting the hell out of here, but by the world he created, in his writing. I find there are academics who say that Kafka couldn't have been Kafka without Prague, and Prague is all over his writing. I think it's the opposite. I think Kafka would have been Kafka anywhere, because we would have been suffocating anywhere he went, and that within that there's, I think, something to be admired, something. A happy ending for him, who we don't necessarily equate with happy endings, but the work he left behind and the world he created was his way of leaving. And he did, even though he often wrote so much in his diaries about how stuck he felt. So Rebecca kind of gave me a lousy job by having to write about a guy who hated Prague for the special issue on Prague, but I think it did lead to something interesting. And if you have questions, looking forward to hearing them.
Thank you, Shalom. Yeah, that was lovely, and it's a great essay. If you haven't read it yet in our current issue, I really recommend it. It's very interesting. Before we leave you, Shalom, I just wondered, I don't know if this can be summed up quickly, probably not, but could you tell us briefly about the relationship that he had with his Jewishness? Is that something that is in his writing, do you think? Was it important to him? I mean, from what I hear, he had quite an ambivalent relationship to his Jewishness. Could you just tell us briefly about that before we leave you?
There were phases. I don't know. I personally don't think they had much to do with his writing, but as far as his own life goes, there were phases. There were moments where he was very interested in Yiddish theater. He was very close with the actors from the Yiddish stage. I think the mysticism of the ultra-Orthodox at that time he found compelling. And so did I when I first heard it. But I don't think he thought of himself in the same way as I don't think he thought of himself as a Prague or a Czech writer. I don't think he thought of himself as a Jewish writer. I think it's actually darkly Kafkaesquely ironic that since his fame, everyone wants to own him. So absurdists want to own him, existentialists want to own him, Jews want to own him, Czechs want to own him. And in a sort of fitting end to his disconnected Jewish life, I love the fact that there is a trunk full of his writings sitting in the Knesset that a bunch of lawyers are arguing over who gets to open it. That couldn't be a more fitting ending for him. But I don't see him as sitting there. I think he was curious, and I think he was a curious person about lots of things. But I don't see it in his work. I don't see it. I see someone with a very broken heart in his work, but not necessarily someone trying to find God.
Okay, thank you. And no doubt our audience will have some thoughts on that, and please send in any questions you have for Shalom and any of our other panelists, and we'll come and ask you, we'll speak to you soon. But our final guest tonight is Pavlina Sulcova, who is the director of Prague's Jewish Community Center. Pavlina grew up in Prague during the communist years, but after 1989, she went to live in Israel, working firstly for the Czech embassy in Tel Aviv and then at the city's Czech Center. She returned to Prague in 2018. So Pavlina, let's go over to you, back to Prague, and you're going to tell us a bit about the JCC and about contemporary life in Prague.
Yes, you actually gave me nice introduction, and I can also relate to what Shalom said with Kafka hating Prague, because me returning after 10 years from Tel Aviv to Prague, especially these days, I suffer with this love-hate relationship to Prague, seeing pictures from Tel Aviv where, the life is back, and here we are stuck, in the long winter and long down. So it's comforting to know that Kafka felt the same way or a similar way. Would you like to play the video or later?
Yes, I think we're just about to see it now. So just tell us a little bit about the video, Pavlina.
Let's play it and I'll explain after.
Okay, it's probably the best way.
So thank you for that. I asked to play this video because I would like to share the big thing, which is for JCC, and I have here the physical thing, and thanks to my background, you cannot see it, never mind. I just say at the beginning that JCC Prague is newly born thing. It's not the official or traditional Jewish community Irena was talking about. This is something, a philanthropic project that was born from the initiative of a few Czech and few Israeli people that felt that it's time to look to the future. Zuzana introduced the heritage sometime, and Kafka. I mean, it's a big thing, and sometimes it feels very heavy, and you would just like to live modern, contemporary life. And often you go to the Jewish Quarter, and it feels like a museum. It actually is museum, although the synagogues are practicing. But unless you are part of the community, it can be very difficult to get in. I have similar experiences when first I tried to go to the community for lunches, and my mom would give me these meal coupons, and she would be pushing me like, go, go. But it requires a courage, and if you are not raised within the community, which was extremely difficult during the communist time and even after, it's not very welcoming place. So I think the idea of establish something like JCC Prague that I've been trying to run, it was to have like open community and welcoming community, and mostly focusing on culture aspects of the Jewish identity or Jewish culture, rather than religious institutions. So this should be more like a secular, more maybe even academic, and focused to the younger generation, alumni of the Lauder School, because there is already a confident generation of people or kids that graduated from the Jewish school, and somehow like there is this vacuum place for them to serve, and also like, you know, that it could compete in the offer of other events and the global world and all these interesting things that are happening, not necessarily if you are or not you are not Jewish. And one of the motives was also to talk to general public and to explain them the heritage in more I would say digestible way, and tell them it's not only Holocaust, it's not only history and religious, there is life, and it can be entertaining and it can be inspiring. It has a lot of things to say in the universal sense, and it's also something you know that they could be part of, or they could somehow find some inspiration. So there is this big mission and the big ideas and the project I spent writing, and then came COVID. So it's if there is something you can rely on, it's Murphy's Law. So when you publish the brochure, that is like a presentation of the concept and the new community center that should be here, you know, inspired by other JCCs all over the world, then there is the first lockdown, and you have to slow down a bit and maybe rethink it or reimagine it, because it doesn't make sense to rent the space and to organize culture events when people cannot really meet. So I decided to reformulate the big plan and think what can be actually done and what can be inspiring in the time when people are tired from online world. You know, when you have fatigue from the Zoom and you cannot see another conference or lecture, and you are tired even like to read a book or, you know, another thing, because it's too much. And we focus on audio and launched the podcast series. For you in UK, this might be not such a novelty, especially not for someone from the States, but podcasts are booming only now in the Czech Republic. So we have the Jewish podcast that has various series, which there is one of commentaries about the contemporary or current events, such as elections in Israel or in the United States, and how Jews vote, and what about Jewish communities and COVID, and how does it influence the community life. So there is this more intellectual line. There is another line which is interviews with Israelis living in Prague, like Israeli expats, to bring them in, because there is quite sizable community of Israelis in Prague, and they are not a part of the Jewish community. For them, it's also something not so easy to enter. Chabad might be too much for them, so they are somewhere in the limbo. And this is how, at the moment, with the given circumstances, I'm trying to bring them in. And there is also a newly launched series, which we called Pod 30, which means under 30. And that one is done by, and not only for young adults, and it's done by students of Lauder School, and they do interviews with their peers, and they do some podcasts or episodes on comics and cinema and all these things that are interesting for the young generation. What you've seen was this book, and this was something which I thought of at the beginning when I had no patience waiting for first lockdown to be over. And first I thought, actually, well, this is great. Like, we will, for sure, for Pesach next year, we will exist, and we will have Seder, and we can launch this book. And now we have the book, and it's clear we will be celebrating Pesach at home, which makes me even more happy that this book was distributed to 150 Jewish families or families of Lauder School people or community in the box, in Pesach in the box, so they can celebrate it with them. And other people also order it through our crowdfunding campaign. And it's comics. It's written and illustrated, we say, not only for kids, because I think it's also for older generation that wasn't raised Jewish and would like to find a way. Sometimes it's afraid to ask, or it's just like, you know, very difficult. It should be said that the Czech Republic is a very secular country. So define your Jewish identity. Often you have to go long journey, and it's not so easy. So I hope this book would make it easy. It also contains this short, we call it minimalistic Seder, or 10-minute Seder, for people who would like to do everything that is possible, all the brachot and all the symbolic food and stuff, but they don't want to read the whole book. And yeah, so that's the book. And behind me you can see Hamantashen, which is from the video. It's another project of JCC Prague, these animated videos. Mostly the trick, I would say, or what I try to do, is to bring in some humor and some lightness after all this heaviness of the past. And so, and I actually think the humor is part of the Jewish identity. So these are animated videos about holidays. We have Hanukkah, that your guide is Hanukkah Lapkes. We have Hamantashen, which was the Purim video. We're working on the Pesach video. And through this, we want to actually like introduce the holidays in some like, I again say contemporary way, but let's say like funny and light way. And you are all welcome to go to our YouTube channel and you know, support the views and see it. It has subtitles, and I hope the jokes are also translated that it will make you laugh. And my clock is buzzing here, so I don't know if I was prepared like in line with the presentation and stuff, but this was my spontaneous step in, and feel free to ask for more questions if you have any.
Thank you very much, Pavlina, for taking us through what will be the future of the community in Prague, we hope. I know when I first spoke to you, you were looking for a site for the JCC. Can you say any more about that?
I was actually going to say, because when Rebecca talked to me, I was in my living room and I was like, what you see is what you get. So I'm happy to say that we have a base now, and I'm actually also happy to say that it's a complex where also Kafka used to live. It's one of his places. Usually we do jokes, wherever you need a souvenir shop, this is the place where Kafka lived, because he moved quite a lot in Prague, and there are many tour guides or guided tours that would be like Franz Kafka tour, and it would start in the Franz Kafka Square and go all around, and it's so many places that often I wonder what he would say, and I feel he would be depressed as I am. But yes, but in this complex, it's right next to the astronomical clock. It's called Prague Creative Center. So I decided to be pragmatic and join in this hub, to have a base and to have some shared infrastructure till the times get better. Like, we can organize some events when this is possible, but in the meantime, we will be there. We won't have like our own premises, but in the future, that's the plan. And so this is in the heart of Prague, very close to the Jewish town. And it's a place where, when opens, there is Scout Institute, there is a cafe, there is nice atrium, place to hang out. So to me, it also fits in the concept to work with the Prague organizations. And Jews were always part of Prague. And I think it's also time to be active part of Prague now. So let's see.
Great. Well, that's a good start for you with the JCC. I hope it continues to go well with that.
Thank you.
We've got lots of questions, so let's open out now to our audience. And if we can go to Alan and Kathy Peters, who want to ask about the Pinkas Synagogue.
Thank you very much indeed. That was very interesting. You say the names are put in the Pinkas Synagogue. Are they the names of the Jews who perished, who lived just in the Czech Republic, or the whole of Czechoslovakia as it was previously?
Thank you for the question. It's just the names of the Jews they perished from Czech lands, because during the World War II, we were not Czechoslovakia anymore. When the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia was set up on the 15th of March 1939, day before the Slovak moved from us. So the names which are on the walls of the Pinkas Synagogue are just the names of the Jews from Bohemia and Moravia.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That wasn't clear. I just wanted to know that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. We'll go to David and Michelle Vogel, who have a question for Shalom about Kafka and his writing.
Yeah, hello. Shalom, I remember studying the Metamorphosis in the original as a student, and I want to know how much you think that the book is autobiographical about the feelings when he changes into a beetle. How do you think that expresses his own discomfort in his own skin, perhaps?
Yeah, I think it's 1,000% autobiographical. When I hear people describing Kafka's writing as about bureaucracy, or that he, somehow foresaw the events of World War II, or that it's about working in a big corporation, I think that they're lying to themselves, that they don't want to admit how they feel about their own families, because it so obviously comes from a place of broken relationships, broken family. And there's so much within it when you really start to take it apart, of how the different family members felt about each other, how, Nabokov did this amazing thing where he took the whole story apart, laid out what the apartment looked like, who went where, what the apple that he threw at him represents, is that from Garden of Eden? And there's all this really cool stuff you can do with it, but I look at it and I'm like, I don't know how you can read that and not see what he was talking about his family. It's a similar thing with the trial where, now we look at it and it's like, oh, it's all about justice and right and wrong and what do we do? But the famous story of Kafka was that he wrote the first chapter of that story, and then he went down to the pub and read it to his friends, cracking up. He was laughing the whole time. He thought it was the funniest story he'd ever written, because it reflected how he felt again about the way you said it, how he felt in his own skin, how he felt in the world. And I think all his work was a way of trying to achieve the impossible task of feeling better in his skin, but if that's not possible, at least laughing at his discomfort.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shalom. And thank you, David and Michelle. Okay, we'll go on to Judy Weleminski, who has a question, which perhaps a few of you might be able to answer. But Judy, did you have someone in mind that you would like to ask first?
I don't know who's most likely to have the information, but I wanted to know how anti-Semitic or not Czechoslovakia was at the beginning of the 20th century. I'm particularly interested because my grandfather was a docent at the university, and it seems surprising that he never became professor, but I'm wondering if that was because of anti-Semitism.
Zuzana, would you like to maybe illuminate a bit about Czechoslovakia at the beginning of the 20th century? And
I just would like to ask, at the beginning of the 20s, the thing is that like Pavlina said very nicely, and I forgot to say also that Jews were always a part of the society from the beginning, and it's always very important to say that Prague was typical in the way that Jews, Czechs, and also the Germans lived together. So also in the beginning of the 20s, the university was, it's the Czechoslovakia, one it's before that there's all kind of the fights between the Czech Jews and Germans, because Jews, when the gate was opened, Jews, because we were part of the Habsburg monarchy, which is also like the example of Kafka, in the way that Jews started to use German as a language of the community, and many people from outside, they thought that the Jews are more Germans than Czech. It wasn't really true, and there were a lot of fights in the 19th century about the language and about the stuff like that. So maybe this is one of the things which played such an important role in the movement, which means that Jews were always bilingual. It was always German and Czech and Yiddish and other languages. So this is one of the examples which shows Prague as a very open-minded city, but sometimes it played a lot of things with anti-Semitism, because when everything started, of course, it was very complicated for the identity, and the identity was always such a big problem, I feel, not just in my country, but also especially in the Jewishness. I feel the same. It's about identity. So maybe this played the role, but it will be nice to get more into your story, to know a little bit more of the background, because it's hard to answer. It can be example from example, but it's a touch. If you would like to know more, we can just discuss it in chat, and I will be very happy to hear a little bit more of the background to answer.
Yeah, it's funny, actually, just to add on to what Zuzana was saying, like everything, I remember reading about Kafka when he was young and expecting, simply because I was raised in America after World War II and everything came down to anti-Semitism and the Holocaust, I was fascinated to learn that his issue, what he really felt, the reason he felt removed from the neighborhood at large was because his father spoke German. And that made them sort of elitist in the eyes of the people who spoke Czech, and it wasn't about I'm sure there were larger things that those languages represented, but for him it was always trying to escape the language, which was fascinating to me.
But if I can step in, it's interesting to say that the father didn't know Czech before he came to Prague, German before he came to Prague, because he grew up in typical Czech family. That's why the name Kafka, it's actually the name of the bird. And because in German you are pronouncing the way FF, it's Kafka. So it's also a little bit complicated with the identity, because he didn't know Czech before he came to Prague. So it's kind of complicated in the story of Kafka.
Yeah.
If I could just say, my family were German speaking and they knew very little Czech as far as I can understand. But I was also interested in the comment that was thrown in Leopoldstadt about Freud not becoming a professor because he was Jewish. I mean, obviously that was Austria, but I don't know to what extent that went through. I mean, there was a German university and the Czech university in Prague, weren't there? So I don't quite know what the feeling was.
In 1899, the university was spread to the Czech and German side, but Freud was actually born in Moravia, so he was from Fribourg, but then he moved to Austria. So that's why you're always saying that there are a few famous people like Freud, Husserl, and others. They were exactly originally born in Czech land, but then they moved to other countries. But the university was split to two parts.
Okay, thank you, Zuzana. And am I right in thinking that the Czech community was particularly secular in Europe as well, the Jewish community? They went from talking to people for the issue. I've heard that the Jewish community was very secular and not very religious. Not that impacted on anti-Semitism, but is that right?
I'll take the floor because I started. Yes, back to the previous. I'll jump back when I have the floor now about this anti-Semitic motivations. If anyone would become professor or not, I think this is possible. I think even later, like during the 50s, actually there were political trials here that were clearly anti-Semitic, and you have evidences that many of people that would be sentenced by communists, usually before very die-hard communists. Yeah, many Jews after the war were very left-wing and quite active in the politics, but in 50s in these trials they were all either jailed or executed even, and it's now when the archives are open and all these things are like, I mean, now it means last 30 years, it's clear that there was this Jewish Bolshevik accusation, you know, and often used, and it was clear anti-Semitism. But you were talking about the previous era, and I believe this could be also an issue, but might be case. And yes, I think the Czech Republic is quite secular. You see it in the Central Europe, like Slovaks are more traditional, more religious, like more Catholic country, Poland as well. Czechs are like here, maybe that makes us more reserved and more, you know, like liberal. And that's what it said, that especially in Prague, this was this educated elite, not like shtetl-like, and also quite assimilated since the second half of 19th century when the Jews got civil rights. And I believe like, I mean, I don't know, this is maybe for Zuzana, if she has some, you know, more like data or more like research, but it's usually, it's said that the orthodoxy, it's a little bit something not fitting now to the environment, but there were a few jumps, you know, there was Holocaust, there was communist time, very difficult time to practice any religion. So, and then the influence of Israel and the rabbinate, and you know, who decides and how you do the revival of the community. So I think all these things influence it. But in general, if you read some books like First Republic, it's usually like very secular, liberal, confident Jewish community, but not like this super orthodoxy.
Okay.
If I can step just one sentence, it's that I like to use the word of the survivor Maya Randova. When she was deported to the Lodz ghetto, she said that the West actually part of Jews met the East because like they were not practicing almost nothing. They didn't know even what is kosher at home. So it was really like to show that most of them were really secure, but maybe it's also good to give the floor to Irena Dousková about the time of the 60s and 70s.
Můžu teda? Já jsem ještě k té minulosti a k tomu, jak ta komunita židovská vypadala už třeba na konci 19. století v Kafkově době a potom ty 20. léta, že vlastně se říkalo už v těch 90. letech 19. století a na přelomu století, že spousta těch rodin židovských, že jsou to takzvaně třídenní židi, že chodí do synagogy na Jom Kippur, Roš Hašana a na narozeniny císaře France Josefa.
So known or it's told about the community in Kafka's times and then later on in the 20s that they were quite secular and they were so-called 3-day Jews, that they would go to the synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and then the birthday of the Kaiser of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
A v tomto duchu to vlastně bylo potom i za první republiky v těch 20. 30. letech. Převážná většina byla úplně asimilovaná a zakořeněna v kultuře, ať už víc tomu německý češství, pak už za té první republiky ten boj vlastně ustal, ale nebo ustal, pro mě změnil formu. Tak to máš. So,
going into the 20s and 30s, the First Republic, the majority of Jews was assimilated into the general public, and they were
víceméně, nebo velmi vlažně jako náboženství.
And the religion was very subtle in the community.
Je taková známá věc v rodině známého v té době slavného spisovatele Langera. Ten měl mladšího bratra, který odešel, ten František Langer byl vlastně lékař a spisovatel úspěšný a jeho mladší bratr začal tíhnout k židovství, tomu východnímu chasidismu, chtěl se o tom dozvědět něco víc, odešel několikrát na východ a potom, když se zase vrátil do Prahy a chodil prostě po vinohradech tak, jak ty východní chasidi vypadají, s tím štrajmlem a v kaftanu a tak ta jeho rodina se za něj příšerně styděla a bylo to něco úplně nevídaného v těch ulicích pražských v těch 20. letech. Tak to jenom
there's a story from the family of a famous writer, František Langer, whose brother would slowly but surely get interested in the eastern part of Judaism, and he would go and repeatedly go visit these Hasidic communities in the east. And then when he came back, the family reportedly was very ashamed of him because he would walk around a sort of, let's say, high middle class neighborhood in Prague, dressed as an Eastern Hasidic man would dress at that time, and they considered that a very embarrassing thing.
Když už to necháme, no ještě řeknu, když už jsem toho Jiřího Langera zmínila, tak on potom napsal krásnou knihu, kde čerpal z těch zážitků a vyprávěl o chasidech a jejich legendy a tak nějak to jde 9 brán.
And he would then
Yeah.
And so he would then write a very nice book, a very beautiful book about the Hasidic community and their traditions and customs, which would be called Devět bran. I'm not sure about the translation into English in that particular title, but
Brana.
Okay. Thank you, Irena. I think we're going to move on because I'm getting lots of questions actually, and I know time is moving on. So let's go to Riva Lera, who has a question about the golem. Can we go to Riva, who is in the States, I think? Well, I know. Hello, Riva.
So I was curious about, this is a change of subject, so forgive me. But I was wondering whether the Jewish artists and writers of Prague are interested in the legend of the golem, or whether it's kind of corny and seems like it's been done and overdone, just sort of what the attitude is towards the legend.
I'll start and I pass the floor. I would say it feels it's overdone. There are some films, there is the classic film, and there is some comedy that was done in, I think, 50s or 60s. This is the main image of Golem. He's like this huge clay monster. I think recently, a few years ago, there was some video game that was done by son of the Rabbi Sidon, and it became some sort of like a cool thing, but I don't really know if what happened to that. And I know that in Israel there are some like Tel Aviv artists that did also like a new film about Golem, so there are some remakes, but I would say it's and this is like, with all the respect to Kafka, sometimes it also feels like he became this tourist attraction. It's on the T-shirt, it's on the mug, and it's overdone. And it's a pity because people don't find a way to discover it better. And with the Golem, it feels to me similar, though for a general public, often this is the main symbol. And maybe for kids, like this would be still like a cool thing. But for artists, I'm not so sure,
I remember going to Barcelona to see the Van Gogh Museum because I was huge into Van Gogh and his writings even more than his painting. And I got there and I was just like, oh, what a shame to grow up here, because he's just a joke. He's on umbrellas, he's on coffee cups, it's everywhere you look, it's sunflowers. And it was just like, oh God, if I had been born here, I'd never want to hear about this guy, not once. And if anybody liked him, it would totally change my opinion of them. I suspect, I haven't been there, but it's a similar thing over there with Kafka and certainly with the Golem.
Okay, thank you, Riva. Just because we have a lot of questions, I'll just try and get through a few. Let's go over to Joe and Rod Fisher, who have a question about music. I don't know who would be the best person to ask that, but Joe and Rod, tell us your question first.
Yes, I'm aware that Prague is a very good center for classical music. And I wondered to what extent the Jewish community has an effect on music in the city.
Who would like to reply to Rod? Pavlina?
Yeah.
You're muted.
Now you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. I'll just start and pass the floor. We usually say every Czech is musician, so I don't know where Jews stand there, but it's yes, so Czechs should be like talented musicians. With klezmer, I don't know, I have also like this similar sentiment, I guess this is very similar in many communities when you try to do some revival and then you end up on the way to nostalgia. There are some klezmer band, it's great, it's fun to go, but it's hard to say if this is actually like authentic, I would say, for Prague or for me. But there are a lot of musicians. I have a friend who is cellist, and she is like discovering some Jewish composers, and there are many other that are also experimenting with the music. Zuzana, I'm passing the floor to her because Spanish Synagogue is one of the venues where concert takes place, so you can continue.
Thank you. I just would like to go to the past to say that music was always connected with Prague and also the Jewish music, because we know that, for example, in the Mysore synagogue, there were organs already in the 1600s also. We are always saying that organs were there for the first time in the Spanish synagogue in the 1900s, but we know that music was connected also before. And like Pavlina said today, the Spanish synagogue and also the Maisel is used for the cultural events. And every month we have concerts there, and always with some Jewish artists. So the music, it's flourishing still there. So it's from the past till now. So if you will have a chance to come when everything will be over, the lockdown and COVID, you are more than welcome to visit the concert in the Spanish synagogue. Maisel, is beautiful acoustic.
Thank you, Susanna. Actually, while you're talking about the Sephardi synagogue, we had a question from Gillian Moonman. Would you like to ask Susanna about the Sephardi synagogue, Gillian?
Don't hearing Julian, but it's not a Sephardic synagogue. It's actually just the design, the Moorish design got actually the name to the synagogue. There's a Spanish synagogue, but we don't have the Sephardic communities in
Spanish synagogue. Yes. Yeah. Okay, I don't think we've got Gillian. Let's have one more question. It's an interesting question from Jackie Richards. Jackie.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much. And it's been a great evening. My question is to mainly Pavlina. Are you intending that your new organization will make links with the general population in Prague? And if so, what will be the intention of doing this?
Yes. I mean, if I understand correctly, if we want to also talk or interact with general public, is that correct?
Yes. Or put it the other way around. There's a new Jewish organization being created in Prague. What does the general population think about that there's this developing revival of Jews in Prague?
Yeah, I think a lot of as we mentioned, this assimilation. This is the long story, right? But a lot of people have some Jewish roots, and they are culturally curious, and they even in Europe with the mixed sentiments towards Israel. I think Czech Republic is considered one of the best friends, and people perceive Israel in a good way. So these are like good. This is a good place to start, but I think a lot of people is afraid of Judaism because it feels like mysterious, and there was this period when this mysterious was interesting. I think this was in early 90s. Now it might feel difficult and like saint and very like almost not to touch. So I would like to break this barrier, and I would like to bring some sense of humor and open the door to everyone who is searching for his or her Jewish identity, or even people just learning more and would like to exactly see it's not only Golem and it's not only klezmer, and there is some normal life, and we can share it. And my future thing would be, but I need a bigger team for that, would be to work with the topics, with the texts, and bring them to bring more, let's say, like secular or not academic, but more like secular education or something that you would like to learn more about Tanakh and the women in Tanakh and all these stories. The fact that we published the book means that there was no illustrated Haggadah for kids. There is not many kids book about Judaism that kids would read it. And now I'm just getting messages from my friends, and everyone is like, oh wow, they love it. And the nice thing is actually that we also donated books to members of WITSO, which are I think 70 plus, and I'm also getting messages like they started reading it and they love it. I think this is building bridges also, beyond the culture interaction or a culture exchange. we still feel like there is no anti-Semitism, but we also feel that there is a rise of fear of the other. And we also say that there is no problem, and I don't know how is it in English, so forgive me if I need some time to. No problem is complicated enough, so it's not Jewish fault, or it's not a fault of Jew, you know. So I think this is some sort of like educational trace to show that there is nothing to fear about, that this might be like a nice win-win for everyone. And also like working with Israeli community, you know, these podcasts, I brought in people that live here for 20 years that speaks Czech. And in the world, the current world, when you talk about migration, and really like sometimes people never saw immigrant, but they already start with the rhetoric, you know, oh, this is like, you know, so I think explaining who people are, what they do, how they contribute to the community or beyond, it's very important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pavlina. And thanks for your question. That feels like a good place to end, as I'm aware time is moving on. Just on that matter of podcasts, very quickly, Pavlina, if people do speak Czech, how do they access your podcasts? We've had one question about it.
It's not very original name. It's called Jcast, J-Cast, and we have it's on Spotify and all the podcast platform. It has to, I'll maybe send it in chat. This might be easiest way, but you can also listen to it. And it's for Czech speakers, but there are also English. There are few interviews that are in English, so don't be afraid. And I'm sending in chat the link.
Thank you. Okay, I've noticed that there are a lot of questions and we haven't got through all of them. So if you would like to email, you can email me in at rebecca@jewishrenaissance.org.uk, and perhaps our panel might be able, if I pass it on to our panel, they might be able to answer things that we haven't been able to get through tonight. If that's okay. There's been a lot of interest, so thank you to our audience and questioners, and thank you to all our guests for giving us a real insight into the history of Prague, as well as a sense of the exciting and inspiring plans for the future of the Jewish community in the city. You've given us a really fascinating background, and I hope we can carry a lot of what you've told us tonight with us on a future visit to Prague, which will be soon, we hope. So before we finish, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the next issue of JR, which comes out at the beginning of April. That's going to have an Irish focus, and we'll be having a launch event for that issue on the 5th of May. That particular event will be looking at the work and life of the avant-garde artist Claude Cahun. You can book a place now, and to do that, go to the events section on the Jewish Renaissance website. So that's our next event. And for all our future events, look at our website at the events section. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us tonight from around the world. It's been a wonderful evening, a wonderful chance to speak to you. Thank you again to our audience, and I hope to see you all again very soon.